Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step into a place that never quite settles, even when the sun begins to sink and the air cools, just enough to let you breathe a little easier. You arrive at the edge of a cattle town in the 1880s, boots touching ground that feels less like earth and more like a fine restless powder. Each step sends a small cloud upward, drifting around your ankles as if the land itself cannot stay still. The horizon glows faintly behind you, but ahead the town waits in a low spread of wooden buildings, uneven and practical, held together by effort more than design. You probably won't survive this comfortably, not because something dramatic will happen, but because everything here asks something from you, even the quiet moments. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and let yourself step forward. You move slowly at first, letting your eyes adjust to the shape of the place. There is no grand entrance, no welcoming sign, just a widening of tracks where wagons have passed again and again, carving shallow grooves into the dry ground. The town does not rise up to greet you. It simply continues as if you have stepped into something already in motion. A commonly accepted detail of these cattle towns is that many of them grew quickly along railroad lines, appearing in a matter of months when conditions were right. You can see that speed in the way everything feels temporary. The buildings stand upright but only just. Boards do not quite meet. Roof lines tilt at angles that suggest more urgency than precision. It is a place built to function first and to endure only if necessary. You take another step forward and the sound beneath your boots changes. The ground here is more compacted, pressed down by hooves and wheels and countless feet. It holds your weight differently, more firmly, as if acknowledging your presence rather than resisting it. That small shift gives you a strange sense of belonging, though nothing else has changed. There is a smell in this air that you cannot ignore. It arrives gradually, not all at once, layered in a way that makes it difficult to separate one thing from another. Dust, of course, always dust. But also manure dried and fresh, wood smoke drifting from somewhere unseen, leather worn and sun-heated, and something else faint but persistent, a sour note that lingers at the back of your throat. You do not need to name it to understand that it comes from too many lives pressed into too small a space. Off to one side you notice movement. A small group of cattle stands behind a rough wooden barrier, their shapes shifting slowly as they adjust their weight. Their presence feels calm, almost indifferent, yet they are the reason this town exists at all. Without them, there would be no need for the rail line, no reason for the buildings, no gathering of people in this otherwise open land. You pause for a moment watching them. Their breathing is steady, their tails flick lazily. The world for them seems simple. Eat, move, rest. Yet everything around them tells a more complicated story, one built on distance labour and the constant pressure of time. Some accounts from the period mention that cattle could travel hundreds of miles along trails before reaching towns like this, driven slowly across vast stretches of land. As you stand here, you begin to feel the weight of that journey, not in your body, but in the atmosphere itself. It lingers, carried in the dust, in the quiet fatigue of the animals, in the worn look of the fences that hold them. You resume walking, drawn forward by a faint increase in sound. It is not loud, not overwhelming, but it is steady. Voices layered over one another. The occasional sharp call, the distant clatter of something wooden striking something else. Life continuing without pause. A curious little detail sometimes noted in personal diaries from the era is that newcomers often felt both invisible and exposed at the same time in these towns. You begin to understand why. No one is looking directly at you, yet you feel as though your presence has already been registered, absorbed into the rhythm of the place. You are not important, but you are not unnoticed either. To your left, a wagon stands half unloaded. Crates rest beside it, their contents hidden, their surfaces marked by travel. A man leans against one of the wheels, hat pulled low, posture relaxed in a way that suggests he has been working for hours. He does not look up as you pass. His stillness feels intentional, a brief pause carved out of a longer stretch of effort. You continue on and the town begins to take clearer shape. A wider path opens ahead, though it would be generous to call it a street. It is simply where movement has concentrated, where the ground has been worn into something resembling order. Buildings line either side, their fronts facing inward as if in quiet agreement. Historians still argue whether these towns were as chaotic as popular stories suggest, or whether daily life followed a more predictable rhythm than later myths would have you believe. As you walk, you sense both possibilities at once. There is disorder here certainly. Nothing aligns perfectly. Nothing feels fully controlled. Yet there is also a pattern, subtle but present, guiding where people stand, how they move when they speak. A door opens somewhere ahead, releasing a brief burst of brighter light and louder sound before closing again. Laughter spills out then fades. The moment is small, but it draws your attention, hinting at spaces within the town that hold a different kind of energy. The sky above has deepened now, the last of the daylight slipping away. The transition feels gentle, almost unnoticed, yet it changes everything. The outlines of buildings soften. Details become suggestions rather than certainties. The town does not stop. It simply shifts into another version of itself. You slow your pace without the thinking. There is no urgency here for you, no task that demands completion. Instead, there is an invitation to observe, to take in the small details that define this place. The way a board creaks under weight. The way dust settles slowly after being disturbed. The way voices rise and fall without ever fully disappearing. You realize quietly that this town is not a destination. It is a moment in motion held together by people passing through, staying briefly, then moving on. And now for a time, you are part of that movement. The path ahead grows slightly brighter as more lamps begin to flicker to life, their glow uneven, but steady enough to guide your steps. You follow that light not because you must, but because it feels like the natural next thing to do. And as you move deeper into the town, the edges of the open land behind you begin to fade, replaced by the closer, more immediate world of woodlight and human presence. The glow ahead draws you forward not with urgency, but with a quiet certainty that this is where the town gathers itself as night settles in. The path beneath your boots widens just enough to suggest intention. What was once a loose scattering of movement now becomes something more defined, a shared space, where people cross paths, pause and continue again. Lamps hang outside several of the buildings, their light soft and slightly uneven, each one creating a small circle that pushes back the darkness just enough to reveal what stands within it. Between those circles, shadows linger. You step from one pool of light into the next, feeling the subtle shift each time, as if passing through invisible thresholds. The buildings here stand closer together. Their fronts face the street with a kind of quiet agreement, forming a corridor that guides both movement and attention. Some doors remain closed, their interiors hidden. Others open and shut with a steady rhythm, releasing fragments of sound that never quite form a complete picture. You notice the texture of the ground changing again. It is more worn here, flattened by constant use. There are marks left behind by wagon wheels, deeper and more defined, crossing over one another in patterns that tell of repeated passage. In places, the surface has been disturbed and then pressed down again, creating uneven ridges that catch your step if you're not careful. A widely accepted understanding is that streets in cattle towns were rarely paved during this period, leaving them vulnerable to dust in dry weather and thick mud when it rained. Even now in this dry evening air, you can see how easily the ground lifts with each movement. The dust does not rise dramatically. It simply follows, lingering low, clinging to boots and hems as if reluctant to settle. To your right, a storefront window glows faintly from within. The glass is not perfectly clear. It distorts the shapes behind it, turning objects into softened outlines. You pause for a moment, trying to make sense of what you see. Shelves, perhaps, containers stacked or arranged with some intention. The suggestion of order inside, even if it remains just out of reach. A small bell sounds as the door opens, and someone steps out carrying with them a brief warmth that fades almost as quickly as it arrives. They move past you without hesitation, their presence momentary absorbed into the larger flow of the street. There is a steady murmur now more noticeable than before. Conversations overlap, not loud enough to dominate, but constant enough to form a kind of background rhythm. You cannot follow any single voice for long. They blend together, rising and falling, creating a sense that the town itself is speaking in many tones at once. An odd observation found in some travel accounts mentions that visitors were often struck by how quickly familiarity could form in such places, even among strangers. You begin to understand that feeling. Though you recognize no faces, the repetition of movement, the shared use of space creates a quiet sense of connection. Everyone here seems to understand the unspoken rules of where to stand, when to move, how to pass one another without interruption. Ahead, a building stands slightly larger than the rest, its doorway open wide. Light spills out more generously here, reaching farther into the street. The sound that comes with it is fuller layered with laughter, the clink of glass, and the low hum of voices gathered in closer proximity. You do not need to step inside to know what kind of place it is. Saloons were a central feature of many cattle towns, serving not only as places to drink, but as informal meeting points where news, deals, and opinions were exchanged. Standing outside, you can feel that role clearly. People move in and out with ease, some lingering near the entrance, others continuing past without pause. You remain where you are for a moment, watching the flow. A man pushes through the doorway, adjusting his hat as he steps into the cooler air. He pauses, as if considering whether to stay outside or return within, then moves on without looking back. His decision feels small, yet it carries the quiet weight of habit. You continue walking, letting the saloon fade behind you. The street does not end. It stretches on its details, shifting gradually rather than suddenly. A narrower building appears on your left, its sign difficult to read in the low light. The door remains closed and the space around it feels still, as if whatever happens inside does not spill outward in the same way. Historians still argue whether the social life of these towns was as centered around saloons as later portrayals suggest, or if a broader range of quieter interactions shaped daily experience. As you move through the street, you sense both possibilities. The louder spaces draw attention, but the quieter ones hold their own kind of presence, less visible but no less real. You pass a pair of figures standing close together, their conversation low and steady. You catch only fragments, words that hint at work, at travel, at plans that may or may not come to pass. They do not pause as you approach. Instead, they shift slightly, making space without breaking their exchange. It is a small gesture, but it speaks to a shared understanding of movement within this place. The air feels cooler now, though it still carries the same layered sense. The difference is subtle, a soft easing rather than a clear change. You notice it in the way your breath feels, in the way the dust seems to settle more quickly between steps. Further ahead, another lamp flickers its flame, adjusting to a light breeze you had not fully noticed before. The movement is gentle, almost uncertain, yet it holds steady. That small resilience feels like a reflection of the town itself, imperfect, shifting, but continuing. You slow again, not because you need to, but because the pace of the place invites it. There is no single destination pulling you forward. Instead, there is a sequence of moments, each one offering something small to observe, to consider, to carry with you for a little while. The open land behind you feels farther away now, though you know it has not moved. What does change is your position within the town. You are no longer at its edge. You are within it, moving along the same paths as those who live and work here, even if only for this brief time. The street continues, and with it the steady rhythm of light, sound, and movement. You follow without hesitation, letting the town reveal itself one quiet detail at a time. You continue along the street until the steady glow of lamps begins to thin, replaced by quieter stretches where light reaches only in fragments. The noise softens here, not gone, but held at a distance, as if the town itself is allowing certain spaces to rest. Your pace slows again, guided less by curiosity now, and more by a growing awareness of your own tiredness. It settles into your legs first. Not sharply, not enough to stop you, but enough to remind you that you have been moving for some time. The dust, the shifting ground, the constant adjustment of each step has taken more from you than you realized. You feel it in your shoulders too, a faint heaviness that makes you roll them slightly as you walk. Ahead a building stands with a modest sign hanging above the door. The lettering is uneven, painted by hand, but clear enough to understand its purpose. This is a place meant for rest, or at least something close to it. You pause just outside, taking in the structure before deciding whether to enter. The building does not promise comfort. Its boards are weathered, the edges softened by time and exposure. The windows are small, their glass imperfect catching and bending the light in ways that make it difficult to see inside. Yet there is a quiet invitation in its stillness. Unlike the saloons, there is no burst of sound, no outward pull. It simply waits. A generally accepted fact about lodging in cattle towns is that accommodations were often basic and overcrowded, especially during busy periods when trail drives brought large numbers of workers into town at once. As you stand here, that reality begins to take shape in your mind. Whatever rest you find inside will likely be shared, negotiated, imperfect. You push the door open, and the sound it makes is soft but noticeable. A gentle creak that seems louder only because of the quiet around it. The air inside feels warmer, though not by much. It carries the scent of wood of fabric that has been used many times and something faintly stale, as if the room has held on to too many nights without fully releasing them. A small counter stands near the entrance, worn smooth along its edges. Behind it, a figure looks up briefly, their expression neutral, neither welcoming nor dismissive. There is no long exchange, no need for one. A few quiet words pass between you, practical and direct, and in return you are given what you need to stay. You move further in, and the space opens slightly, though not enough to feel spacious. A few chairs line one wall, their positions uneven, as if they have been shifted many times and never quite returned to their original places. A narrow staircase leads upward its steps, showing the marks of repeated use, each one worn just a little at the centre. An unusual detail recorded in some first-hand accounts is that travellers often slept fully clothed in such places, either out of necessity or caution. As you place your foot on the first step, you begin to understand why. The environment does not encourage complete relaxation. Instead, it suggests a kind of partial rest where comfort is balanced against awareness. The staircase creaks beneath your weight, each step responding with a quiet acknowledgement. The sound is not alarming, but it is persistent, a reminder that nothing here goes unnoticed. You reach the top and follow a narrow hallway, the floorboards shifting slightly as you move. Doors line one side, each one closed. From behind them you catch fragments of life. A low cough, the rustle of fabric, the faint murmur of someone speaking though the words themselves do not carry. These sounds are not intrusive, they simply exist as part of the shared space you have entered. Historians still debate how much privacy individuals could expect in frontier lodging, with some suggesting that personal space was limited to the bare minimum. As you walk the length of the hallway, that idea feels less like an abstract discussion and more like a present reality. The walls do not fully separate one life from another. They only soften the edges. You find your room without difficulty. The door opens with a slight resistance, as if it has settled into its frame over time. Inside, the space is small, defined by what it contains rather than what it offers. A bed stands against one wall, its surface uneven but serviceable. A small table rests beside it, its purpose simple and clear. You step inside and close the door behind you. The sound of the hallway fades slightly, though not entirely. It becomes a background presence, steady and low. You stand still for a moment, allowing your eyes to adjust, taking in the details one by one. The bed draws your attention first. Its frame is sturdy, though not refined. The bedding is clean enough, but worn its texture, telling of repeated use. You press your hand lightly against it, testing its firmness. It yields just enough to suggest rest, though not indulgence. The window sits above the table, its glass catching a faint reflection of the lamplight outside. You move closer and look through it, though the view is limited. The street below appears in fragments broken by the imperfections in the glass. Figures pass, their shapes shifting as they move through the uneven surface. You sit on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the day settle more fully now that you have stopped moving. The room does not silence the town, it only filters it. The distant sounds remain softened but present. A reminder that life continues just beyond these thin walls. A small, almost overlooked note from period writings mentions that some travellers found comfort not in silence but in the steady presence of others nearby. As you sit here, you begin to understand that feeling. The sounds around you, though imperfect, create a sense of continuity. You're not alone even in this small enclosed space. You remove your boots slowly, setting them aside with care. The act feels deliberate, marking a shift from movement to rest. Your feet, freed from their confinement, register the change immediately. The floor beneath them is cool, firm grounding. You lie back, not fully stretching out at first, but allowing your body to adjust gradually. The bed supports you in its own uneven way. It does not cradle, it simply holds. That is enough. The ceiling above you is plain, its surface marked by small variations in the wood. You follow those patterns with your eyes, letting your thoughts drift without direction. The journey that brought you here feels both immediate and distant, as if it belongs to another moment already. Outside, a door opens and closes somewhere below. The sound travels upward, softened by distance. A voice follows briefly, then fades. The rhythm of the town continues steady and unbroken. You take a slow breath, then another, feeling the air move in and out with a quiet regularity. The room does not offer comfort in the way you might expect, but it offers something else. A place to pause, a place to exist without needing to move forward, at least for now. And as you settle into that stillness, the details of the town begin to blur slightly at the edges, not disappearing but softening as if preparing to carry you gently into the next moment. The room holds you in a shallow kind of rest, never fully quiet, never entirely still. At some point, without noticing the exact moment, you drift into sleep. It is light and uneven, shaped by the sounds that pass through the walls and the unfamiliar firmness of the bed beneath you. When you wake, it is not sudden. It feels more like rising slowly through layers, guided by something subtle rather than sharp. A faint grey light has replaced the darkness at the window. It does not flood the room. It seeps in gently, outlining the edges of the table, the bed, the door. The air feels cooler now, carrying none of the warmth that lingered the night before. You lie still for a moment, listening. The town has changed again. The low murmur of voices has returned, but in a different form, softer, more deliberate. There is less laughter, more purpose. You hear footsteps below, steady and measured. A door opens, then closes. The rhythm of the place has shifted from evening gathering to morning beginning. You sit up slowly, letting your body adjust. The stiffness in your back and shoulders reminds you of where you are. This is not the kind of rest that erases fatigue. It simply pauses it. You swing your feet to the floor, feeling the cool boards beneath you grounding and firm. As you dress, you notice how the small actions carry more weight here. Pulling on your boots, tightening laces, brushing dust from your clothing. Each step feels like preparation, not just routine. Outside this room, the day is already underway. Records from the period suggest that mornings in cattle towns began early, often before the sun fully cleared the horizon, especially for those whose work depended on the brief, cooler hours of the day. You sense that urgency now, even before stepping outside. The town does not wait for you. It continues whether you are ready or not. You open the door and step into the hallway. The sounds are clearer here. Voices speaking in low tones, the movement of someone passing nearby, a faint scrape of wood against wood. You make your way toward the staircase, each step carrying a familiar creak that feels less surprising now. Downstairs, the space has changed. What was quiet and dim the night before now holds a different kind of activity. A few people sit at the tables, their postures relaxed, but attentive as if balancing rest with readiness. A woman moves between them, placing simple dishes and cups with practiced efficiency. The smell reaches you before you fully take it in. Coffee, strong and dark, something cooking, likely bacon, its scent rich and immediate. Bread perhaps warmed or toasted just enough to release a soft, comforting aroma. It is not elaborate, but it is steady, dependable. You take a seat where a space allows the chair solid beneath you. No one pays much attention as you settle in. This is not a place for introductions, it is a place for continuation. You are simply another presence within it. A plate is set before you without ceremony. The food is straightforward, prepared with function in mind rather than presentation. You begin to eat, noticing how your hunger responds quickly, as if it has been waiting for this moment. The flavors are simple but satisfying, each bite grounding you further into the rhythm of the day. A lesser-known detail from personal letters of the time mentions that coffee in frontier towns was often brewed strong enough to compensate for long hours and limited rest. As you take another sip, you understand why. It is not delicate. It is direct, carrying warmth and a slight bitterness that lingers just long enough to keep you alert. Around you, conversations begin to take shape. They're not loud, but they are purposeful. You catch fragments again. Talk of cattle, of distances travelled, of weather conditions further along the trail. Names of places you may never see, yet they pass through the air as if they are part of a shared map everyone here understands. You notice how people eat with a kind of quiet focus. There is little lingering, no extended pause between bites. The meal serves its purpose, fueling what comes next. Even those who appear relaxed carry a sense of readiness, as if the day is already waiting just beyond the door. There is a subtle observation often discussed by historians questioning whether the pace of life in these towns felt rushed to those living within them, or if it simply reflected a steady accepted rhythm shaped by necessity. Sitting here, you begin to feel that distinction. Nothing seems hurried in the way you might expect, yet everything moves forward without delay. You finish your meal and stand leaving the space as you found it without drawing attention. The door opens easily this time, and the morning air greets you with a cool clarity that feels sharper than the night before. Outside, the light has grown stronger, though the sun itself remains low. The street looks different now. Where shadows once softened the edges, the early light reveals more detail. The uneven boards, the marks in the ground, the small imperfections that define the place. Movement has increased. People cross the street with intention, carrying tools, leading animals, preparing for tasks that seem already in progress. The town does not wake all at once. It unfolds, each part joining the whole at its own pace. You step forward, feeling the ground beneath your boots with renewed awareness. The dust still rises, though less noticeably in the cooler air. The sounds of the town, once distant and layered, now feel closer, more defined. A man passes you leading a horse, his attention fixed ahead. Another stands near a doorway, adjusting something you cannot quite see. A pair of figures walk together, their conversations steady their steps in quiet alignment. You realize that morning here is not a beginning in the way it might feel elsewhere. It is a continuation. The town did not truly sleep, it only shifted, carrying its motion through the night and into this new light. You take a slow breath, the cool air filling your lungs, and for a moment everything feels clear. Not simple, not easy, but clear. This is how the day begins here. Not with stillness, but with quiet momentum. And as you move forward once more, you find yourself becoming part of that motion again, step by step, without needing to decide where it will lead. You follow the movement of the town outward, away from the tighter cluster of buildings, and toward the source of much of its purpose, peace. The sounds guide you before the sights do, and a deeper, heavier layer of noise begins to take shape, different from the human voices behind you. It is slower, more grounded. The shifting of weight, the low rumble of animals, the occasional sharp call cutting through it all. The air changes as you walk. The scent grows stronger, more immediate. Dust still lingers, but now it mixes with something thicker, heavier, impossible to ignore. You feel it settle in your chest as much as you smell it. This is where the cattle are held, where movement becomes accumulation. The land opens slightly, though not into anything resembling emptiness. Instead, it fills with structure. Fences stretch outward in rough lines, built quickly, but reinforce where it matters most. The wood is worn, some of it splintered, yet it holds. Inside the cattle shift and press against one another, their presence forming a dense, living mass. You pause at the edge, taking it in. The scale is larger than you expected. Not endless, but enough to feel overwhelming at first glance. Each animal moves in small ways, adjusting position, stepping forward or back, responding to the space available rather than choosing it. A widely documented fact is that cattle towns served as key transfer points where herds driven over long distances were gathered and prepared for transport by rail to eastern markets. Standing here, that function becomes clear. This is not a place of rest for the animals. It is a point of transition, a moment between long movement and another kind of journey. Men move along the edges of the pens, their steps careful but practiced. Some carry tools, others simply watch, their attention fixed on the shifting herd. Their work is not dramatic. It is steady, repetitive, shaped by the need to maintain control without causing unnecessary disturbance. You notice how they position themselves never directly in the path of movement, always slightly to the side, guiding rather than forcing. A call here, a gesture there. Small actions that ripple through the mass of animals, creating subtle shifts that prevent larger disruptions. An interesting detail mentioned in some period accounts is that cattle, despite their size, could be easily unsettled by sudden noise or unfamiliar movement leading to what was known as a stampede. As you stand here, you begin to understand the tension that underlies even the calmest moments. Everything appears steady, but that steadiness depends on constant awareness. You walk along the fence, your hand brushing lightly against the wood. It is rough beneath your fingers, worn smooth in places where others have done the same. The texture grounds you, connecting you to the countless small actions that have taken place here before your arrival. The ground beneath you is different again, more compacted, yet also more uneven. Layers of hoof prints overlap, creating a surface that shifts slightly under pressure. It is not unstable, but it requires attention. Each step asks you to adjust or remain aware of where you place your weight. Nearby, a group of men works together to guide a smaller set of cattle from one pen to another. Their movements are coordinated, though not in any formal way. They watch one another respond to changes, adapt as needed. The animals move reluctantly at first, then with increasing flow as the path becomes clearer. You stand still watching the process unfold. There is no urgency in their actions, yet nothing feels slow. It is a measured pace shaped by experience rather than haste. The goal is not speed, it is control. Some historians have questioned how efficient these operations truly were, noting that conditions varied widely from town to town. As you observe, you can see both the strengths and the limitations. The system works, but it depends heavily on the skill and attention of those managing it. A man leans against the fence a short distance from you. His posture relaxed, though his eyes remain focused on the activity. He adjusts his hat slightly, not as a gesture toward you, but as a small act of comfort. You realize that much of the work here involves waiting as much as acting. Moments of stillness balanced against moments of intervention. You continue along the perimeter, the sounds of the cattle forming a steady background. The lowing, the shifting, the occasional sharper call. It is not unpleasant, but it is constant. It fills the space in a way that leaves little room for silence. Further ahead, the outline of the rail yard begins to appear. Tracks stretch outward, their lines cutting through the land with a kind of deliberate clarity. Train sits idle for now, its presence quiet but unmistakable. This is where the next stage begins, where movement changes form. A lesser-known observation from the time suggests that the arrival of railroads transformed these towns almost overnight, turning them from isolated points into connected hubs within a much larger system. As you look toward the tracks, you feel that connection. This place, though remote, is part of something wider, something that extends far beyond what you can see. You stop again, taking a moment to let the scene settle around you. The cattle, the men, the fences, the tracks. Each element holds its place, contributing to a process that feels both ordinary and significant. The morning light has grown stronger now, revealing more detail with each passing minute. Shadows shorten, edges sharpen. The town, which felt softened by night, now presents itself more clearly, its imperfections visible but accepted. You turn slightly, looking back toward where you came from. The buildings stand in the distance, their forms less imposing in the daylight. The path between here and there feels shorter now, more familiar. You realize that this space, though separate from the center of the town, is deeply connected to it. The activity here feeds the movement there. The work done in these pens shapes the rhythm of the streets you walked earlier. You take a breath, the air heavy but steady, and begin to move again. Not away, not toward any fixed destination, but along the edge of something that continues to unfold whether you pause or not. And as you walk, the sounds of the cattle remain with you, a constant reminder of the purpose that holds this place together. You drift away from the pens at a slow angle, letting the dense sound of the cattle settle behind you into a steady hum. The air grows a touch lighter with each step, though the scent does not disappear completely. It lingers in your clothes and your breath, as if the place has marked you in a quiet, practical way. Ahead, the town gathers itself again. The street widens just enough to hold more people without feeling crowded. Movement here is different from what you saw at the fences. There is less pressure, more release. Men step with a loosened gait, shoulders dropping slightly, voices lifting a fraction. You recognize the change without needing it explained. This is where the trail ends for now and something like relief begins. A well-documented pattern of the era shows that cowboys after long cattle drives often spent their pay quickly in town, turning weeks or months of restraint into a brief burst of spending. You can feel that pattern in the way small groups form and dissolve, in the way pockets are checked, in the way glances pass between companions who have shared a long stretch of land. You pass two men leaning against a post, their hats tipped back just enough to reveal faces marked by sun and wind. Their conversation moves in short bursts, pauses in between, as if words are less necessary after so much time spent together in silence on the trail. One laughs not loudly, but with a depth that suggests the release of something held for too long. You continue on, letting their voices fade into the background. A few steps ahead, another group gathers near a water trough, their movements unhurried. One splashes water onto his face, the gesture deliberate, almost ceremonial. The droplets fall to the ground, darkening the dust for a moment before disappearing. A curious observation from personal accounts notes that some cowboys preferred simple acts, like washing and resting, over immediate celebration when first arriving in town. As you watch, that choice makes sense. The body seeks balance before indulgence. The mind follows more slowly. You move closer to a building with its door open wide, though this one feels different from the louder spaces you passed the night before. Inside, a few men sit quietly, boots stretched out, hats resting low over their eyes. No one speaks. The stillness feels intentional, a shared agreement to do nothing for a while. You do not step inside. Instead, you remain at the threshold, observing how rest takes shape here. It is not softness, not comfort in the way you might expect. It is simply the absence of effort, the chance to let the body exist without demand. Further along, the tone shifts again. Laughter returns more frequent now. The sound of boots striking wood, the scrape of chairs, the low murmur of voices layered with something sharper. Energy gathers in pockets not evenly distributed, but enough to create a sense of anticipation. Some historians have explored whether the image of carefree cowboys in town has been exaggerated, suggesting that many remained cautious, aware of the risks that came with crowded, unfamiliar spaces. As you walk, you sense that balance. There is ease, yes, but it sits alongside a quiet alertness. Eyes move not constantly, but often enough to suggest awareness of surroundings. You pass a man standing alone, his posture straight, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. He does not appear tense yet, there is a stillness in him that feels deliberate. You wonder how long he has been here, whether he has arrived with others or alone, whether he plans to stay or move on soon. A lesser-known detail from the period suggests that many cowboys were young, often in their late teens or early 20s, carrying responsibilities that shaped them quickly. As you look around, you begin to notice that youth beneath the weathered surfaces, faces that hold both weariness and a kind of openness, as if the future remains uncertain but possible. You continue walking, drawn by the subtle shifts in sound and movement. The street bends slightly, not enough to disorient, but enough to reveal a new stretch of space. Here the buildings sit a little farther apart, giving the impression of the breathing room even if the difference is small. A horse stands tied near a post, its head lowered, its body still. Its presence adds a quiet counterpoint to the human activity around it. You approach slowly, your steps measured, and pause at a respectful distance. The animal does not react, it's calm, steady and unbroken. You reach out not to touch but to feel the space between you. There is a shared awareness there, brief but clear. Then you step back, allowing it to remain undisturbed. The sun has risen higher now, though it still holds a gentle quality. The light spreads evenly across the town, revealing details that were hidden before. The grain of the wood, the wear on the ground, the small marks left by countless actions. You notice how the town carries both movement and pause at the same time. Some people walk with purpose, heading towards tasks that have already begun. Others linger, stretching moments of rest into something longer, as if reluctant to return to work too quickly. A thoughtful observation often raised by scholars is whether these brief periods in town were more about escape or recovery for those coming off the trail. As you move through the space, it feels like both. There is release in the laughter, in the loosened steps. There is also restoration in the quiet moments, in the simple acts of sitting, washing, breathing. You slow again, letting yourself match the rhythm around you. There is no need to choose one pace over another. The town holds multiple speeds at once and you move between them without effort. A group passes by, their conversation animated, their gestures wide. They carry with them a sense of shared history, of miles travelled together, of challenges faced and endured. You catch a fragment of their talk, something about weather, about distance, about a place that lies far behind them now. You realise that for many here, this town is not the destination. It is a pause between journeys, a place to gather, to spend, to rest and then to leave again. You take a slow breath, the air warmer now, and feel the weight of the morning settling into something steadier. The sharpness of arrival has softened. The uncertainty has eased, replaced by a quiet understanding of how this place moves. And as you continue along the street, surrounded by voices, footsteps, and the subtle shifting of lives intersecting, for a brief moment you find yourself carried forward once more, not by necessity, but by the simple act of being here. You move a little farther along, letting the clusters of cowboys and their shifting energy settle behind you. The street does not empty, but it changes tone again. The sharper bursts of laughter soften into quieter, more measured sounds. The pace steadies. The movements become smaller, more purposeful, less about release and more about continuation. Here the work feels different. You begin to notice it in the details. A line of clothing hangs between two buildings, moving gently in the morning air. Fabric worn thin in places, patched in others, each piece telling a quiet story of use and repair. A woman stands nearby, her hands moving with practiced rhythm as she adjusts the line, her attention steady and focused. You slow your steps, drawn not by noise, but by the calm repetition of her work. There is no urgency in her movements, yet nothing is wasted. Each gesture is efficient, shaped by routine rather than decision. A broadly recognized detail from life in frontier towns is that much of the daily stability depended on women's labor, often carried out in ways that were less visible but deeply essential. As you watch, that idea takes form in front of you. This is not work that draws attention, it simply holds things together. You continue walking, noticing how many small tasks unfold around you once you begin to look for them. A doorway stands open, revealing a narrow interior, where someone moves between table and stove, the faint sound of utensils touching metal carrying out into the street. The smell of something cooking drifts outward, lighter than the morning meal you had earlier, but just as steady. A woman steps out from that doorway, wiping her hands on a cloth, her expression neutral but alert. She glances briefly at the street, not searching for anything in particular, but taking in what is there. Then she turns back inside without pause. There is a quiet strength in these movements, something grounded and continuous. It does not rise or fall with the rhythm of the cattle drives. It remains. A small detail mentioned in some lesser-known accounts is that boarding houses were often run by women who managed not only meals and lodging, but also the delicate balance of personalities passing through. As you pass another building, you catch a glimpse inside. Long table chairs arranged close together, a space designed to hold many lives at once, even if only temporarily. You imagine the conversations that might take place there. Not loud or dramatic, but steady. Talk of work, of prices of letters received or not received. The small exchanges that build a sense of continuity in a place defined by movement. You continue on and the street opens slightly, revealing a well where a few figures have gathered. Buckets rest nearby, their surfaces worn smooth by repeated use. A woman lowers one into the well, the rope sliding through her hands with a practiced ease. The motion is steady, controlled, familiar. Water rises slowly, the bucket emerging with a soft shift of weight. She lifts it not with strain but with a measured effort that suggests long familiarity. Another figure steps forward to take it, carrying it away without words. An observation sometimes raised by researchers is how access to water shaped daily routines in frontier towns, influencing where people gathered and how they interacted. Standing here, you can see that pattern clearly. This is not just a place to collect water, it is a point of quiet connection where movements intersect without needing conversation. You step closer not to interrupt but to observe. The rhythm continues, bucket after bucket, hand to hand, task to task. No one rushes, yet nothing stops. A child appears at the edge of the scene, watching for a moment before stepping forward to help. Their movements are smaller, less certain, but guided by the same pattern. A hand reaches out, adjusts their grip, then withdraws. The learning happens without instruction, shaped by presence rather than explanation. You move on carrying that image with you. The town reveals itself in layers, each one quieter than the last, yet just as important. Further along, you pass a narrow space between two buildings. Inside, a woman sits beside a basin, her hands moving through fabric submerged in water. The motion is repetitive, almost meditative. Lift, press, rinse, repeat. The sound is soft, a gentle rhythm that contrasts with the harsher noises you heard earlier. A commonly overlooked aspect of frontier life is how much time and effort was devoted to maintaining clothing, keeping it usable through constant wear. As you watch, you begin to understand the patience required for such tasks. It is not quick work. It does not end once begun. It continues day after day. The air here feels slightly cooler, shaded by the buildings that stand close on either side. You pause for a moment, letting that difference settle against your skin. The town offers these small variations, these brief pockets of relief if you move slowly enough to notice them. A question sometimes explored in historical studies is whether the contributions of women in these towns were fully recognized at the time, or if much of their work remained unseen and undervalued. As you walk, the answer feels clear in its quiet way. The work is visible, yet it does not draw attention. It exists as part of the background, steady and essential. You pass another doorway where a woman stands speaking with a man. Their conversation calm, their gestures minimal. There is no tension, no urgency, just an exchange balanced and measured. When they finish, they part without ceremony, each returning to their own tasks. You realize that this part of the town holds a different kind of energy. Not the release of the cowboys, not the tension of the cattle pens, but something more enduring. A continuity that does not depend on arrival or departure. You take a slow breath, the air carrying softer scents here. Soap, water, food, wood. The heavier smells of the pens feel distant now, though not entirely gone. Your steps slow again, matching the rhythm around you. There is no need to hurry. The town continues not in bursts, but in steady lines of effort that stretch from morning into evening and beyond. And as you move through this quieter space, you begin to understand that what holds this place together is not only the visible movement of trade and travel, but the quieter work that continues without pause, shaping each day in ways that are easy to overlook yet impossible to replace. You move on from the well and the narrow spaces where quiet work continues, and the street opens just enough to reveal a different kind of movement. It is lighter, less burdened, though not without its own demands. You notice it first in the sound, a brief burst of laughter that rises and falls quickly, the quick rhythm of footsteps that do not carry the same weight as those you have been following. Children. They appear in small groups, not gathered in one place but scattered along the edges of the street. One runs past you, turning sharply to avoid a wagon wheel, their movement instinctive practiced. Another follows more slowly, calling out something that dissolves into the air before you can fully catch it. You pause watching them as they move through the same space that holds so much labour and tension. Their presence does not interrupt the rhythm of the town. It threads through it, adapting, finding openings where they exist. A commonly accepted insight into frontier life is that children often took on responsibilities at an early age, contributing to household and community tasks as soon as they were able. As you observe, you begin to see how that reality coexists with moments of play. One child carries a small bundle of wood, setting it down carefully before turning back to join the others. The shift from task to play happens without ceremony. You continue walking and the sounds follow you. A stick strikes the ground in a steady pattern. A quick exchange of words. A pause, then another burst of movement. Their energy is contained but not restricted, shaped by the space rather than limited by it. A small detail found in some period recollections suggests that games in such towns were often improvised using whatever materials were available. You see that now. A piece of rope becomes a boundary. A worn object becomes something to chase, to throw, to retrieve. The rules exist only as long as they are needed, then change without hesitation. You step aside as a group passes their path, cutting across yours without hesitation. They adjust slightly when they notice you not stopping, just shifting enough to continue. It is a small negotiation of space handled without words. Nearby, a woman calls out, her voice firm but not harsh. One of the children slows, glances back, then changes direction, moving towards the sound. The others continue for a moment, then drift apart, their game dissolving as quickly as it formed. You notice how quickly roles shift here. A child at play becomes a helper in an instant. A moment of freedom gives way to a task that needs to be done. There is no clear boundary between the two. A question sometimes raised in historical discussions is whether childhood in such environments was experienced as something distinct or simply as an early stage of participation in adult life. As you watch, the answer feels layered. There is play unmistakable and present, but it exists within a framework that expects contribution, awareness, and adaptation. You move farther along and the street narrows slightly again. A small group of children sits near the side of a building, their attention focused on something in the dirt. You approach slowly, careful not to disturb them. They do not look up at first. Their concentration is complete. Their movements precise in a way that suggests quiet agreement. One draws a line, another adjusts it. A third places a small object at its edge. The activity is simple, yet it holds their full attention. You stand at a distance, observing. The world around them continues. Footsteps pass, voices rise and fall, yet within this small space they create something separate, something defined by their own focus. A lesser noted observation from the time is that children often learned social patterns through such interactions, negotiating rules, roles, and boundaries in ways that mirrored the larger community. As you watch, you can see that process unfolding. There is cooperation but also subtle tension. A disagreement that surfaces then settles. A change in the arrangement that reflects a quiet compromise. One of them looks up, briefly meeting your gaze for a moment before returning to the task. There is no hesitation, no curiosity that lingers. You are part of the environment, acknowledged but not central. You continue walking, carrying that brief connection with you. The street ahead holds fewer figures now, the movement more spread out. The sounds of play fade behind you, replaced once again by the steady rhythm of work and conversation. A doorway stands open to your left, and inside you catch a glimpse of a small space where a child sits beside an older figure, their hands moving together over a simple task. The motion is slow guided, instruction given not through words but through demonstration. The learning is quiet, continuous. An idea sometimes explored by scholars is that knowledge in such towns was often passed down through direct experience rather than formal teaching. As you observe this moment, that idea feels tangible. The child watches, imitates, adjusts. The process repeats. You move on the light, and now stronger, the air warming gradually. The town feels more settled into the day, its rhythms clearer, its patterns easier to follow. You realise that the presence of children adds a different layer to this place. Not a softer one, not exactly, but a more fluid one. Their movements connect spaces that might otherwise remain separate. They move between work and play, between instruction and freedom, without needing to define the transition. You slow your steps again, letting the town carry you forward at its own pace. There is no single path, no fixed direction. Only a series of moments, each one revealing something small, something easy to overlook if you move too quickly. And as the sounds of their laughter fade into the background, you continue on, aware that even here in a place shaped by labour and necessity, there remains room for something lighter, something that moves quickly and leaves little trace, yet shapes the rhythm of the day all the same. You leave behind the scattered energy of children and step into a stretch of town where the mood tightens just slightly. Not tense, not uneasy in an obvious way, but more contained. Movements feel measured here, voices drop a little lower. People seem to carry a clearer sense of purpose even in stillness. A figure stands ahead near the centre of the street, not blocking the way, but positioned in a way that draws attention without demanding it. You notice the posture first. Upright, steady, not rigid, but held with intention. A hat sits firmly into place, casting a shadow that softens the expression beneath. As you approach, you begin to recognise the role this person holds, the sheriff, or something close to it. Titles here can shift responsibilities, blending depending on the needs of the town. Still, the function is clear enough. This is someone tasked with maintaining a kind of order, even if that order is not always easy to define. A broadly supported understanding of frontier towns is that law enforcement often operated with limited resources, relying as much on reputation and presence as on formal authority. Standing here, you can see that balance in motion. The figure does not move quickly, does not speak loudly, yet people adjust their paths slightly as they pass. You slow your pace, observing how others interact with him. A man approaches, pauses, speaks a few words. The exchange is brief, quiet, practical. No gestures of power, no visible tension. Just communication followed by a nod, and then both continue in their separate directions. You continue walking, not directly toward him, but near enough to feel the subtle shift in the air. It is not fear, it is awareness, a shared understanding that certain boundaries exist even if they are not always clearly marked. An interesting note found in some accounts is that sheriffs in cattle towns were often elected or appointed locally, their authority shaped by the community rather than imposed from afar. That idea seems present here. The figure does not stand apart from the town, he stands within it. You pass close enough now to hear a fragment of conversation. Something about a dispute, perhaps. A mention of a name, a place. The details are incomplete, but the tone remains calm. Whatever the issue, it is being handled in a way that avoids escalation. You move on, glancing back briefly. The sheriff remains where he is, shifting his weight slightly, scanning the street without appearing to do so. It is a quiet vigilance, not constant in appearance, but consistent in effect. Further along, you notice a small group gathered near a building. Their posture is different, less relaxed, more focused. You approach slowly, not to intrude, but to understand. A disagreement, perhaps, nothing loud, nothing dramatic, but enough to draw attention. Two figures stand facing each other, their voices low but firm. Others stand nearby, not intervening, but present, watching. You feel the subtle tension in the space, not sharp, not threatening, but real, the kind that could shift in either direction depending on what happens next. A thoughtful point raised in historical studies is that conflict in these towns was often resolved through informal means, relying on negotiation, reputation, and community pressure rather than strict legal procedure. As you observe, that process seems to unfold here. Words exchanged, pauses, small adjustments in stance. No one steps forward to take control immediately. Instead, the moment is allowed to develop, guided by those directly involved. The sheriff does not appear, at least not yet. Perhaps he is aware. Perhaps not. Or perhaps his presence is not required unless the balance tips. A lesser-known detail suggests that many disputes were settled quietly, without record leaving little trace in official accounts. Standing here, you can see how that might happen. The conversation continues, then softens. One figure steps back slightly, the other nods just once. The group begins to disperse. The moment passes. You exhale without realizing you'd been holding your breath. The tension dissolves, leaving behind only the steady rhythm of the town. Movement resumes. Voices return to their previous tone. You continue on the experience, lingering with you. Law here is not a constant force pressing down. It is something that appears when needed, then recedes. A presence rather than a structure. You pass a building with a small sign near the door. The lettering is simple but clear enough to suggest its purpose. A place where official matters might be handled. The door is closed, the interior unseen. It stands as a reminder that some form of order exists beyond what is visible on the street. A question often explored by historians is how effective law enforcement truly was in such environments given the limited personnel and vast areas involved. As you walk, the answer feels complex. There is order, but it is not absolute. It depends on cooperation as much as authority. You notice again how people move around one another, how space is negotiated without words. A slight shift in direction, a pause, a glance. These small actions maintain balance in a way that formal rules alone might not. The sun has risen higher now, and the light sharpens the edges of everything. Shadows shorten, details become clearer. The town feels more exposed in this light, its imperfections more visible, yet also more accepted. You take a slow breath, the air warmer, carrying the familiar mix of scents. The earlier coolness has faded, replaced by a steady heat that will likely grow stronger as the day continues. The sheriff remains somewhere behind you now, his presence no longer in sight but still part of the structure you move within. You realize that even when unseen, that role shapes the behavior of those around it. You slow your pace once more, letting the rhythm of the town guide you. There is no urgency pulling you forward, only the steady unfolding of moments, each one connected to the next. And as you continue along the street, the balance between order and uncertainty settles into something you can feel rather than define, a quiet understanding that holds the town together without ever fully revealing how. You move beyond the quiet tension of the street and find yourself drawn once again toward a place where the town gathers more closely. The sound reaches you first, not sharp or overwhelming, but layered in a way that suggests many small interactions happening at once. Voices overlap, chairs shift glass, touches wood in soft rhythmic patterns. The doorway ahead stands open, the interior lit more brightly than the street outside. Light spills outward, not harsh, but steady enough to invite movement. You pause at the threshold, allowing your eyes to adjust before stepping in. Inside, the space feels fuller than it appeared from outside, not crowded to discomfort, but dense with presence. People sit at tables, stand near the bar, lean against walls. Each position seems chosen not by design, but by habit. There is a flow here, though not immediately obvious, guiding where people settle and how they move. Saloons in cattle towns often served many roles beyond simply offering drink, functioning as gathering places, informal offices, and centers for exchanging news. As you stand just inside the door, you can feel that range of purpose in motion. Conversations shift from one topic to another, without clear boundaries. Business blends into casual talk. Laughter follows a serious remark without hesitation. You step further in the floor beneath your boots, firm but worn, responding with a soft sound that merges with the rest of the room. No one stops to look at you directly. Your presence is absorbed into the larger pattern, just another figure entering, pausing, moving. The bar stretches along one side, its surface marked by a repeated use. Hands rest there, lift, set down again. A figure behind it moves with practiced efficiency, reaching, pouring, sliding a glass across with a motion that feels almost automatic. There is no rush, yet nothing slows. You find a place to stand, not at the center, but slightly to the side where you can observe without interrupting. From here, the details begin to take shape. A pair of men sits close together, their heads inclined toward one another as they speak. Their voices are low, their gestures minimal, a negotiation perhaps, or a shared memory being revisited. Nearby, another group speaks more freely, their laughter rising and falling, punctuating the steady hum. An unusual detail recorded in some first-hand recollections is that saloons often acted as unofficial post offices with letters and messages passed along through networks of regular patrons. You notice a small exchange near the bar. A folded piece of paper changes hands tucked away without comment. The act is brief, almost invisible unless you're watching for it. You shift your weight slightly, letting the atmosphere settle around you. The air carries a mix of scents. Wood worn smooth by time, smoke faint but persistent. The sharp note of alcohol softened by the presence of many bodies sharing the space. A recurring point discussed in historical studies is whether these establishments were primarily places of excess, or if they also provided a kind of social stability in otherwise uncertain environments. As you stand here, the answer feels balanced. There is energy, yes, but it is contained. The room holds it, shapes it, prevents it from spilling outward unchecked. You notice how people arrange themselves. Some sit with their backs to the wall, their view of the room unobstructed. Others face inward, more focused on their immediate company. These choices feel intentional, though not necessarily conscious. A man steps up to the bar beside you, placing his hands flat against the surface for a moment before speaking. His voice is steady, his posture relaxed. He receives his drink nods once and moves away without lingering. The exchange is simple, efficient part of a pattern repeated countless times. You turn slightly, your gaze moving across the room. In one corner, a table holds a small group engaged in a quiet game. Cards rest in their hands, their movements deliberate, their expressions controlled. The tension here is different from what you saw earlier in the street. It is contained within the boundaries of the table, shaped by rules that all present seem to understand. A lesser-known observation from the period suggests that card games in such settings were not always about winning money, but also about passing time and maintaining a sense of routine. As you watch, that possibility feels present. The stakes may matter, but the act itself holds its own value. You take a slow breath, the air warm, the sound steady. The room does not demand anything from you. It simply allows you to exist within it, to observe, to be part of the flow without needing to define your role. A woman moves through the space carrying a tray, her path weaving between tables with practiced ease. She does not pause unless necessary, her attention divided, yet focused. Each step is placed with care, avoiding contact without breaking her rhythm. An analytical point sometimes raised by scholars questions how such spaces balanced freedom with unspoken rules of behavior. As you continue to watch, you begin to see those rules in action. No one speaks too loudly for too long. Movements adjust to avoid collision. Disputes, if they arise, remain contained at least for now. You shift your position again, leaning lightly against a nearby post. From here you can see both the entrance and the deeper parts of the room. People come and go, each arrival blending into the existing pattern without disruption. Time feels different inside. Not slower, not faster, but less defined. Moments stretch just enough to lose their edges. Conversations begin and end without clear markers. Actions repeat familiar yet never identical. You realize that this place serves as a kind of anchor within the town. Not fixed in the sense of permanence, but stable enough to gather people to hold them for a while before they move on again. You take one last look around, letting the details settle into memory. The way light reflects off the worn surface of the bar. The steady motion of hands lifting and setting down glasses. The quiet focus of those at the card table. The layered voices that never fully resolve into silence. Then you step back toward the doorway, the light outside drawing you outward once more. The transition is gentle. The sounds of the saloon soften behind you as the street reclaims your attention. And as you return to the open air, carrying with you the warmth and rhythm of the room you have just left, you find that the town continues to unfold, one space leading into another, each revealing its own quiet purpose. You step back into the daylight, and for a moment the brightness feels sharper than before, as if the town has adjusted itself while you are inside. The air carries a warmer edge now, and the rhythm of the street feels slightly more stretched, less tightly gathered than the room you just left. You continue forward, letting the saloon settle behind you, its layered voices fading into a softer memory. Ahead, the street opens into a space where people do not linger quite as long. Movement here is more transient. Figures pass through rather than gather their paths, crossing briefly before separating again. It is here that you begin to notice a different kind of presence. A man leans casually against a post, his posture relaxed in appearance, though something in the stillness feels deliberate. His clothing is neat, but not new, his hat angled just enough to shade his eyes without hiding them completely. He watches the street not in a fixed way, but with a quiet awareness that seems to follow motion without calling attention to itself. You pass him slowly, aware of his presence without needing to meet his gaze. There is nothing openly suspicious, nothing that demands concern. Yet there is a sense that he's waiting though for what you cannot say. A well-established observation about cattle towns is that they attracted not only workers and merchants, but also a steady flow of drifters, gamblers and individuals seeking opportunity in less predictable ways. As you continue walking, that broader mix becomes more visible. A pair of men stands near a narrow building, speaking in low tones. Their conversation is close, their gestures small, as if the details matter enough to keep contained. One of them glances up briefly, scanning the street before returning to the exchange. You move on, letting their voices fade. A few steps ahead, another figure approaches you from the opposite direction. His stride is smooth, unhurried, yet there is a precision to it, a controlled ease that feels practiced. He nods slightly as he passes, a gesture that acknowledges without inviting. You begin to sense a pattern. These are not the same as the cowboys you observed earlier, nor the townsfolk engaged in steady work. Their presence feels lighter, less anchored. They move through the town rather than within it. A curious detail mentioned in some period accounts is that professional gamblers often dressed more carefully than others in frontier towns, using appearance as part of their trade. You notice that now, a subtle difference in fabric, in posture, and the way hands move with measured confidence. You slow your pace, allowing yourself to observe more closely. Near the edge of the street, a small group gathers around a makeshift table. Cards are laid out, though not in the formal setting you saw inside the saloon. This feels more temporary, more fluid. The men stand rather than sit, their bodies angled toward the table, their attention focused but not tense. The game unfolds in silence, punctuated only by the soft sound of cards touching wood. No laughter, no raised voices, just concentration. You remain at a distance, watching how the interaction unfolds. A hand is played, a glance exchanged, a pause, then another movement. The rhythm is steady, controlled, shaped by an understanding that does not need to be spoken. A topic sometimes explored by historians is whether gambling in these towns was seen primarily as entertainment or as a serious economic activity. As you observe, it feels like both. There is skill here and risk, but also a kind of routine, a familiar pattern that repeats across different settings. One of the men steps back slightly, his expression unchanged, though the shift suggests the end of his participation. Another steps forward to take his place without interruption. The transition is smooth, as if expected. You continue walking, the scene dissolving behind you. The street bends again, revealing another stretch of buildings, each one holding its own quiet purpose. A figure sits on a low bench outside a doorway, his posture relaxed but alert. He watches the passers-by with a faint expression that could be interest or simply habit. As you draw closer, he shifts slightly, adjusting his position without breaking his gaze. You pass him, feeling the brief connection of awareness before it fades. There is no interaction, no need for one. Yet the presence lingers for a moment, part of the subtle network of observation that runs through the town. A lesser known note from personal writings suggests that many individuals in such places relied on reading others, quickly forming impressions based on movement, clothing, and demeanour. As you move through the space, you begin to feel that process happening around you, quiet and continuous. You adjust your pace slightly, not to avoid attention, but to align with the flow. There is a balance here, an unspoken agreement about how to move, how to exist within the shared space. Further along, a small commotion catches your attention. Not loud, not alarming, but enough to draw a few glances. Two figures stand facing each other, their voices low but firm. Others nearby pause watching without stepping in. You feel the familiar shift in the air, that subtle tightening that signals the possibility of change, yet it does not escalate. A moment passes, then another. One of the figures steps back, the tension easing almost as quickly as it formed. The observers return to their movements. The street resumes its steady rhythm. The moment leaves little trace, as if absorbed into the larger flow. An interpretive question often raised by scholars is how often such interactions shape the reputation of individuals within these communities, influencing future encounters in ways that were rarely documented. As you walk on, that idea feels present. Each small exchange carries weight beyond itself. You take a slow breath, the air now warmer, the sun higher. The town continues to reveal itself not through dramatic events, but through these quiet layers of interaction. And as you move forward, surrounded by figures who pass through as easily as they arrive, you begin to understand that this place is shaped as much by those who do not stay as by those who do. You continue along the street, leaving behind the quiet calculations of gamblers and the fleeting presence of those who pass through without settling. The space ahead feels different again, not because it is louder or busier, but because it carries a kind of intention that stands apart from the rest. The buildings here appear more ordered, their fronts aligned with a little more care, their entrances less open to constant movement. There is a sense of pause in this part of town, as if something within it asks for stillness or at least a slower step. You notice it in your own pace. Without deciding to, you begin to walk more quietly, your footsteps softer against the ground. The air feels unchanged, yet your awareness of it sharpens, as if this space invites attention rather than movement. Ahead, a modest structure comes into view. Its design is simple, yet distinct from the surrounding buildings. A small steeple rises above it, not tall but enough to mark its presence. The door stands closed, though not firmly shut, leaving a narrow line where light meets shadow. A commonly recognized element of frontier towns is that churches often served as both religious and social centers, offering them a place for gathering that contrasted with the more informal spaces of saloons and streets. As you approach, you can feel that difference clearly. You pause at the entrance, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for the quiet that seems to settle here. The sounds of the street do not disappear, but they soften as if held at a distance by the presence of the building itself. You push the door gently and it opens without resistance. Inside, the space is simple and calm. Rows of benches face a small raised area at the front. Light enters through narrow windows, casting soft patterns across the floor. The air feels still, not heavy, but settled, as if it has not been disturbed for some time. You step inside, your movements instinctively slower. The floor responds with a faint sound beneath your boots, but even that seems muted within these walls. A figure sits near the front, head slightly bowed, hands resting together. There is no sign of ceremony, no formal gathering, just a quiet presence existing within the space without drawing attention. You take a seat near the back, not to join, but to observe. The stillness here feels different from the rest you found in the boarding house. That was a pause shaped by fatigue. This feels more deliberate, as if it exists by choice rather than necessity. An interesting detail noted in some accounts is that church attendance in cattle towns varied widely, with some communities embracing it strongly, while others treated it as optional or occasional. As you sit here, you sense that flexibility. This is not a space that demands presence. It offers it. You rest your hands lightly on your knees, letting your breath settle into a steady rhythm. The quiet does not press in. It simply exists, allowing space for thought or for the absence of it. A question sometimes explored by historians is whether religious institutions in frontier settings acted more as moral anchors or as social organizers. Sitting here, the distinction feels less important than the effect. The space provides a counterbalance to the rest of the town, a place where movement slows, where voices lower, where time stretches just enough to be noticed. You glance toward the front again. The figure there has not moved. Their stillness feels complete, not forced. It adds to the atmosphere, reinforcing the quiet without defining it. You remain seated for a moment longer, letting the calm settle more deeply. Outside, a faint sound reaches you, a wagon passing perhaps. The distant rhythm of the town continues, but it feels far away from here. A lesser-known observation suggests that such spaces were sometimes used for purposes beyond worship, including meetings, announcements, and even temporary schooling. You can imagine those uses now. The benches fill the air carrying voices rather than silence. Yet in this moment it remains undisturbed. You stand slowly, your movement careful, not out of necessity but out of alignment with the space. As you turn toward the door, the light shifts slightly, marking your path without drawing attention. You step outside and the sounds of the town return more clearly. Not abruptly, but steadily, as if they'd been waiting just beyond the threshold. The street feels familiar again, its rhythm easy to follow. Yet something has changed in your awareness. The contrast between the quiet inside and the movement outside lingers, shaping how you notice each detail. You continue walking your steps, measured, your attention open. The town does not ask you to choose between these different spaces. It holds them all at once, each offering something distinct. You pass a pair of figures speaking in low tones, their conversation steady. Nearby, someone adjusts a sign outside a doorway, the motion small but deliberate. The everyday patterns resume unchanged, yet now more clearly defined. A reflective idea often raised by scholars is that such moments of pause, though brief, could influence how individuals engage with the rest of their day. As you move forward, you feel that possibility. The quiet you experience does not remain behind. It travels with you, softening the edges of what comes next. The sun continues its steady rise, the light growing stronger, the shadows shorter. The town settles more fully into its daytime rhythm, each part moving in coordination with the others. And as you walk on, leaving the small church behind you, you carry with you a sense of balance, a quiet understanding that even in a place defined by motion and uncertainty, there are moments of stillness that shape everything around them. You step away from the quiet stillness of the church and re-enter the steady flow of the town where movement resumes its familiar pattern. The light has strengthened now, settling across every surface with a clarity that reveals small details you might have missed before. The grain of wood, the wear on door frames, the subtle marks left by repeated use all become more visible. You follow the street as it bends slightly, leading you into another part of town where the sounds change once more. Not louder, but sharper in texture. The ring of metal striking metal. The rasp of a tool drawn across a surface. The low murmur of voices that accompany focused work. You turn toward the sound and find yourself standing near a blacksmith's shop. The structure is open at the front, allowing both light and sound to spill outward. Inside, a figure moves with deliberate strength, lifting and lowering a hammer in a steady rhythm. Each strike lands with precision, the sound carrying clearly into the street. The heat from within the shop reaches you even before you step closer. It contrasts with the open air outside, creating a boundary you can feel as much as see. You remain just outside, observing. A widely accepted aspect of frontier towns is that skilled trades such as blacksmithing were essential to daily function, providing tools, repairs, and support for both human and animal needs. As you watch, that importance becomes clear. The work here is not occasional, it is constant. The blacksmith pauses briefly, adjusting the position of the metal before continuing. The rhythm resumes each movement, controlled practice shaped by experience rather than thought. There is no wasted effort. Each action serves a purpose. You continue walking, the sound of the hammer fading gradually behind you. The street opens again, revealing other forms of work that fill the town in quieter ways. A carpenter stands outside a partially finished structure, measuring and cutting with careful attention. The wood lies in neat stacks nearby, each piece waiting to be shaped. His movements are slower than the blacksmith's, but no less precise. The sound here is softer, the scrape of saw against wood, the tap of a tool aligning pieces into place. An often overlooked reality of these towns is that many buildings were constructed quickly and then modified over time, adapting to changing needs. As you watch, you can see that process in motion. The structure is not final, it is becoming. You move on, passing a small storefront where a barber works inside. Through the window you catch a glimpse of the scene, a chair worn but sturdy, a figure seated still while another stands behind, hands moving with careful control. The interaction is quiet, focused, a brief pause in the day for both. A small but interesting detail noted in some accounts is that barbers often served as informal sources of news, their shops becoming places where information was exchanged as easily as services were provided. You can imagine that now the low conversation, the passing of details from one person to another. You continue along the street, offering one example after another of work that supports the town in ways less visible than cattle or trade. A shopkeeper arranges items on a shelf, adjusting their position with small deliberate movements. A clerk stands behind a counter recording something in a book, their attention fixed on the task. A question sometimes raised in historical discussions is how much of the town's identity was shaped by these everyday roles rather than the more dramatic figures often remembered. As you move through this space, the answer feels clear. Without these steady efforts, the town would not hold together. You pass a narrow alley where a man repairs a wagon wheel, his hands working methodically, testing each adjustment before moving on. The wheel rests against the wall, its shape simple yet essential. The work here is quiet, but it carries weight. Without it, movement would stop. A thoughtful observation suggests that much of frontier life depended on maintenance, rather than expansion, on keeping things functioning rather than constantly building new ones. As you watch, that idea feels present. The town is not only growing, it is sustaining itself. You slow your pace, letting these details settle into your awareness. The rhythm of work here is steady, not driven by urgency but by necessity. Each task connects to another, forming a network that supports the whole. The sun continues to rise, its warmth becoming more noticeable. Shadows shorten further and the light reveals even more of the town's texture. The imperfections do not fade. They become part of the pattern. You take a breath, the air carrying a mix of scents. Wood, metal, dust, and something faintly sweet from a nearby shop. The combination is subtle, but it grounds you in the present moment. A reflective point sometimes explored by scholars is whether individuals in such environments viewed their work as temporary or as part of a longer commitment to place. As you walk, you sense both perspectives. Some move with the intention of staying. Others carry a restlessness that suggests departure. You pass another figure, this one carrying a set of tools, their steps measure their gaze forward. There is no hesitation in their movement. The day is already underway and they are part of it. You continue on the street, stretching ahead, each new section offering its own variation on the same theme. Work in its many forms shaping the rhythm of the town. And as you move forward, you begin to understand that beyond the stories of cattle and cowboys, it is this steady, often unnoticed labour that forms the foundation of everything you have seen, holding the town together in ways that do not call attention to themselves, yet remain essential to its existence. You move on from the steady rhythm of tools and measured labour, and after a short distance, another layer of the town begins to make itself known. It does not arrive suddenly. It builds gradually through scent, texture, and a subtle change in how the space feels around you. The air grows heavier again, though not in the same way as near the cattle pens. This is different. More domestic, yet no less persistent. You notice it first in the smell of food, simple and direct. Bread warming somewhere out of sight. Something simmering, slowly releasing a faint, steady aroma. Then beneath it another layer. Waste not fresh, but lingering. Water that has been used and left to settle. The combined effect is not overwhelming, but it is constant. You slow your steps, becoming more aware of the ground beneath you. It feels slightly softer here, though still uneven. In some places, the surface has darkened, holding on to moisture that has not fully dried. Your boots press into it just enough to leave a mark before lifting again. An often acknowledged aspect of life in these towns is that sanitation systems were limited or entirely absent, leaving waste disposal and water management to be handled in simple, often improvised ways. As you move through this part of the street, that reality becomes clear without needing explanation. You pass a narrow space between buildings, where a shallow trench runs along the edge. The water within it moves slowly, carrying with it small fragments of debris. The motion is gentle, almost unnoticed unless you look directly at it. yet it shapes the space, influencing where people step, how they move. A woman stands nearby, pouring a bucket of water into the trench. The action is controlled, practiced. She does not linger once the task is done. She simply turns and returns to her doorway, leaving the water to join what is already there. You continue walking the rhythm of the town, adjusting around these details. Movement here is more careful. People step with greater attention, avoiding certain areas, choosing paths that feel more stable. A small but telling note found in some first-hand descriptions mentions that residents often developed an instinctive awareness of where to walk and where not to, navigating these conditions without conscious thought. As you move, you begin to adopt that awareness yourself. Your steps adjust not by decision but by observation. The smell of food grows stronger as you pass another building. The door stands open, and inside you catch a glimpse of a simple kitchen space. A pot rests over a heat source, its contents stirred slowly by a figure whose movements are steady and unhurried. The scene is quiet, grounded, focused on necessity rather than display. You pause briefly, letting the warmth from inside reach you. It contrasts with the dampness outside, creating a small pocket of comfort that exists only within that threshold. You move on, and the air shifts again. The scent of animals, though faint compared to earlier mixes with the other layers. It does not dominate. It blends, becoming part of the overall atmosphere. A point sometimes explored in historical analysis is how access to clean water and food influenced health and daily experience in frontier towns. As you walk, that connection feels as immediate. Every element you observe contributes to a larger pattern, one that affects everyone here in ways both visible and subtle. You pass a man carrying 2 buckets, one in each hand. The water inside moves with each step, catching the light briefly before settling again. His pace is steady, his focus forward. The task is simple, yet it requires attention, balance, repetition. Further along, you notice a small group gathered near another well. The scene is similar to what you observed earlier, yet the context feels different now. The need is clearer, the importance more immediate. A lesser discussed detail suggests that water sources in these towns were often shared by many households, creating points of both cooperation and tension. As you watch, you see how the process unfolds. One person draws water, another waits, a third steps forward as space opens. The sequence continues without interruption. You step aside, allowing the flow to continue. There is no need to insert yourself. Observation is enough. The ground beneath you shifts again, becoming slightly firmer as you move away from the damp areas. The change is subtle but noticeable. Your steps feel more stable, less cautious. You take a slow breath, the air still layered, but now familiar. The scents no longer stand out as sharply. They become part of the background, integrated into your awareness. A reflective question sometimes raised by scholars is how individuals adapted to these conditions over time, whether they became accustomed to them or simply endured them. As you continue walking, the answer feels complex. Adaptation happens, but it does not erase the reality. It simply allows life to continue within it. You pass another doorway where a figure stands rinsing a cloth, the water dripping steadily onto the ground. The motion is repetitive, almost soothing in its consistency. The task is small, yet it contributes to the larger effort of maintaining order in a place where disorder is always present. The sun climbs higher, and the warmth begins to press more firmly against your skin. The damp areas will likely dry as the day continues, though not completely. The cycle will repeat, shaped by use, by need, by the limits of what can be managed. You slow your pace once more, letting the details settle into your understanding. This part of the town does not draw attention in the same way as others. It does not offer spectacle or strong emotion. Yet it holds a truth that underlies everything else. You realize that survival here is not defined by single events, but by these ongoing conditions. Food prepared, water carried, waste managed, steps adjusted, each action small yet essential. And as you move forward, leaving this stretch behind you, carry with you a deeper awareness of the quiet, persistent realities that shape daily life in this place, not in dramatic ways, but in steady, unbroken lines that run beneath everything you have seen. You move on from the damp edges of the street and the quiet labour of keeping things usable, and the town shifts again, not in sound this time, but in feeling. There is a subtle tightening in the air, not heavy, not immediate, but present enough that you notice it without needing to name it. The sun has risen higher now, and with it comes a stronger warmth that presses gently against your skin. Shadows have shortened, pulling closer to the buildings, leaving fewer places for cool relief. The light reveals everything more clearly, and in that clarity small imperfections stand out. You continue walking, your steps steady, your attention open. The street ahead looks much like the others you have passed, yet there is a difference that becomes clearer as you move forward. The pace here feels slightly slower, not because of rest, but because of caution. A figure sits outside a doorway, their posture still, their gaze unfocused. You pass them quietly, sensing something in their stillness that feels different from simple rest. There is a weight there, subtle but real, as if the body remains while something else is withdrawn. You move on and the reason begins to take shape. A small building stands ahead, its front plane, its purpose not immediately obvious. There is no crowd, no noise drawing attention. Yet as you approach, you notice the way people pass it. Not avoiding, but acknowledging, even if only with a glance. This is where illness gathers. A frequently noted reality of frontier towns is that medical care was limited, often provided by individuals with varying levels of training, relying on a mix of practical knowledge and available remedies. As you stand near the building, that reality settles into place. This is not a space of certainty. It is a place of effort, of attempt. The door stands slightly open, and from within you catch the faintest hint of movement. A shadow shifting, a quiet sound that could be a voice or simply the movement of fabric. You do not step inside. Instead, you remain at a distance, allowing the space to exist as it is. A figure emerges slowly, their movements careful, as if each step requires thought. They pause in the doorway, adjusting to the light, then move aside, making room for another to pass. There is no urgency, no visible distress, but the atmosphere carries a quiet seriousness. A small but revealing detail found in some accounts is that many treatments during this period relied on remedies that would now seem uncertain, ranging from herbal preparations to more experimental methods. As you observe, you can imagine the range of approaches that might take place within those walls. You continue walking through more slowly now. The awareness of this place lingers, shaping how you notice the rest of the street. A man passes you, his arm bound with a simple cloth. The fabric is clean, but the way he holds it suggests discomfort. He moves steadily, not stopping, not drawing attention. The injury is part of his day, not separate from it. You watch him go, then turn your gaze forward again. An idea often explored by historians is how communities responded to illness in environments where resources were limited and outcomes uncertain. As you move through this space, you sense that response in small ways. A glance of concern, a brief exchange of words, a quiet adjustment in behaviour. You pass another building where a woman stands, speaking softly to someone inside. Her voice is low, her posture attentive. The conversation is not meant for others, yet its tone carries enough to suggest care, perhaps worry. You continue on the street, gradually returning to a more familiar rhythm. The sounds of work and movement reassert themselves, though they feel slightly muted now, as if layered over the awareness you carry with you. A lesser-known observation suggests that many people in such towns lived with a constant awareness of risk, not always at the front of their minds, but never entirely absent. As you walk, that awareness feels present. It does not dominate. It simply exists alongside everything else. The sun continues its steady climb, the heat building gradually. The air feels heavier, though still moving gently through the spaces between buildings. You notice how people adjust to it. A slower step, a brief pause in the shade, a hand raised to shield the eyes from the brightness. These small adaptations mirror the larger ones you've already seen. You take a breath, letting the air settle in your chest. The town continues its rhythms unchanged, yet now you understand more of what lies beneath them. A reflective question sometimes raised by scholars is whether resilience in such environments was a conscious effort or simply a condition of life. As you move forward, it feels like the latter. People do not speak of endurance, they live it. You pass a final glance toward the small building behind you, now partially obscured by distance and angle. It blends back into the row of structures, its presence no longer distinct yet not forgotten. You continue walking, your steps steady, your pace unhurried. The town opens ahead once more, offering new details, new moments to observe. And as you move on, you carry with you the quiet understanding that beneath the visible patterns of work and movement there exists a deeper layer of uncertainty, one that shapes each day in ways that are rarely spoken yet always felt. You continue forward and the street widens just enough to let a different set of details come into view. The movement here feels more layered, not because there are more people, but because their differences become easier to notice. Clothing posture, language, small gestures. Each carries a hint of origin, of background, of a path that led here by a route you cannot fully trace. A man passes you speaking in a language you do not immediately recognize his voice. Low directed toward a companion who responds with a quiet nod. Their conversation flows smoothly, unaffected by the space around them. You catch only the rhythm, not the meaning, yet it adds another layer to the sound of the town. A widely supported observation about cattle towns is that they often drew people from many regions and backgrounds, including immigrants, freed individuals, and those seeking opportunity beyond established structures. As you move through this part of the street, that variety becomes more visible, not as a spectacle, but as a steady presence. You pass a small group gathered near a storefront, their clothing distinct from what you have seen elsewhere. The fabrics differ in texture, and cut the colours slightly more varied, though still muted by dust and wear. They stand close together, their conversation contained, their expressions focused. You slow your pace not to linger, but to observe more carefully. There is a subtle difference in how space is shared here. Some groups cluster more tightly, others maintain a slight distance. These patterns feel shaped by familiarity, by comfort, by unspoken understanding. A detail noted in certain accounts suggests that while these towns brought together diverse populations, social boundaries often remained influencing where people lived, worked, and gathered. As you walk, you begin to sense those boundaries. They are not marked by signs or clear divisions. They appear in patterns of movement, in who stands where and who speaks with whom. You pass a woman carrying a basket, her step steady, her gaze forward. As she moves, others adjust slightly, making space without drawing attention. The interaction is smooth, yet it carries a quiet awareness. Further along, you notice a building set slightly apart from the others. Its entrance is simple, its exterior worn but maintained. A few figures stand nearby, their posture relaxed, their conversation easy. The space feels self-contained, not closed but defined. A lesser discussed observation suggests that certain groups within these towns formed their own networks of support, relying on one another in ways that were not always visible to outsiders. As you look at this small gathering, that idea feels present. There is a familiarity here, a shared understanding that does not need to be explained. You continue walking the street, offering new combinations of people and movement with each step. A man leads a horse past you, his clothing reflecting long travel, his posture upright despite the fatigue that shows in small ways. Behind him, another figure follows their pace slightly slower, their gaze scanning the surroundings. You begin to notice how the town holds both connection and separation at the same time. People share the same space, yet their experiences within it can differ. The street does not divide them, but it does not erase those differences either. A question sometimes explored in historical writing is how individuals navigated these layered identities in environments that were both open and constrained. As you observe, the answer seems to lie in adaptation. People move within the space available to them, finding ways to exist, to work, to connect. You pass a small interaction between two figures, who exchange a few words, their tones neutral, their gestures minimal. There is no sign of conflict, yet the exchange remains brief, contained. They part without pause, each continuing in their own direction. The sun continues to rise, and with it the heat grows more noticeable. The air feels heavier now, though still moving gently. You can feel it against your skin, a steady presence that shapes how you move. You adjust your pace slightly, not slowing significantly, but allowing for the weight of the day. Others do the same. Movements become more deliberate, less hurried. A reflective idea often raised by scholars is whether the diversity of these towns created opportunities for new forms of interaction or reinforced existing divisions. As you walk, it feels like both. There are moments of connection, brief and unremarked. There are also patterns that keep certain distances intact. You pass another group, their laughter soft but genuine, their conversation flowing easily. The sound lifts the air slightly, adding a note of ease to the space. It fades as you move on, replaced by the steady rhythm you have come to recognize. You take a slow breath, the air warm, carrying the familiar mix of scents. The town feels fuller now, not just in numbers, but in layers of experience. You realize that this place is not defined by a single story. It is made up of many overlapping, intersecting, sometimes aligning, sometimes remaining disparate. And as you continue walking, you carry that awareness with you, understanding that the town holds more than what is immediately visible, shaped by the many paths that have led people here and the many directions they may take when they leave. You move on, and the street begins to thin again, not empty but stretched as if the town is giving way to the land that surrounds it. The buildings stand a little farther apart here, their shapes softened by distance and light. The sound of voices fades slightly, replaced by something broader, something less contained. The wind. It arrives quietly at first, brushing past your clothing, lifting a small trace of dust from the ground. Then it gathers just enough strength to be felt more clearly, pressing lightly against you as you walk. It carries the scent of dry earth, of distant grass, of something open and unconfined. You pause for a moment, letting it move around you. The town does not block it. It passes through, weaving between structures, slipping into narrow spaces, emerging again without resistance. A well-established observation about life in these regions is that weather conditions often shaped daily routines more than any fixed schedule, influencing when work began, how it was carried out, and when it had to stop. As you stand here, you can feel that influence directly. The wind does not ask permission. It simply exists, altering the space in subtle ways. You continue walking your steps, adjusting slightly as the ground shifts beneath you. The dust lifts more easily now, swirling in small patterns that form and dissolve within seconds. It does not rise high, it stays close to the surface, following the movement of air rather than creating its own. A man stands near a post, holding his hat firmly in place as a stronger gust passes through. His posture remains steady, though his clothing moves with the force of the wind. He does not react beyond that small adjustment. This is familiar to him. You move past him, feeling the same push against your own body. It is not strong enough to stop you, but enough to remind you that the environment here is not passive. It interacts with you, shaping your movement as much as you shape it. A small detail mentioned in some accounts is that dust storms, though not constant, could appear quickly and disrupt entire days of work, covering everything in a fine layer that settled into every surface. As you walk, you can imagine how easily that might happen. The ground is ready, the air willing. The street bends slightly, leading you toward a more open area where the buildings give way to a wider view. The horizon stretches out with the land beyond the town, revealing itself in muted tones. Grass dry and low, earth pale and uneven. The sky above clear and expansive. You stop again, taking in the space. The town feels smaller from here, its structures less dominant, its sounds more distant, the wind moves more freely, unbroken by walls or fences. A question sometimes explored in historical writing is how people adapted to such environments over long periods, whether they came to see these conditions as normal or remained aware of their challenges. As you stand here, it feels like both. The wind, the dust, the heat. They are part of the day, not separate from it. You turn slightly, watching as a wagon moves slowly across the open ground. Its wheels leave shallow tracks that may not last long, depending on the next shift in weather. The driver sits upright, guiding the movement with steady hands, his attention fixed on the path ahead. You continue walking, the ground beneath you firmer here, less worn by constant passage. Your steps feel more certain, though the wind still moves around you, adjusting your balance in small ways. A reflective observation suggests that in such landscapes, people learn to read subtle changes in weather as indicators of what might come next. As you move, you begin to notice those details. The direction of the wind, the feel of the air, the clarity of the sky. The sun continues to climb its warmth, now more direct. The combination of heat and wind creates a dryness that settles on your skin and your breath. It is not uncomfortable, but it is constant. You pass a figure standing alone, looking out toward the open land. Their posture is still their attention focused on something beyond the immediate view. You do not interrupt. The moment feels private, even in the open space. You move on, the town slowly returning as you follow the curve of the path. The buildings reappear, their shapes more defined again, their presence reasserting itself. The wind does not disappear. It follows, though softened by the structures that break its path. It becomes part of the background, once more less noticeable but still present. A thought sometimes raised by scholars is whether the unpredictability of weather contributed to the resilience often associated with frontier communities. As you walk, that idea feels grounded in reality. Adaptation here is not optional, it is required. You take a slow breath, the air warm and dry, carrying the familiar mix of scents. The town feels steady again, its rhythms re-established after the brief openness. And as you continue forward, you carry with you the awareness that beyond the visible structures and daily routines, there is a larger force at work, shaping everything quietly, persistently, without needing to be seen. You follow the curve of the path back into the town, and as the buildings gather around you again, another layer of activity begins to reveal itself. It is less about movement this time and more about intention. Not the steady labour you saw earlier, but something more forward-looking, shaped by plans, expectations, and the quiet calculation of what might come next. The street here holds a different kind of energy. People pause more often. Conversations linger a little longer. There is a sense that decisions are being made even in small exchanges. You notice a group gathered near a storefront, their attention focused inward. The door stands open, and inside you can see shelves lined with goods. Not abundant, but arranged with care. The figure behind the counter speaks in a measured tone, their hands resting lightly on the surface as they explain something to those gathered. A commonly accepted aspect of cattle towns is that they often experienced rapid periods of growth driven by trade rail connections and the constant movement of people and goods. As you stand near the doorway, you can feel that momentum. The town is not static. It is always becoming something else. You step closer, listening without intruding. The conversation turns to prices to supply to what might arrive in the next shipment. The words are practical, yet they carry an undercurrent of anticipation. Each item on the shelf represents not just its current use, but its potential value. A small but telling detail found in some historical accounts is that merchants in these towns often operated on thin margins, balancing risk with opportunity in an environment that could change quickly. As you observe, that balance feels present in every exchange. Decisions are made carefully even when they appear simple. You move on, the conversation fading behind you. A few steps ahead, another group stands near a partially constructed building, their attention focused on its progress. One gestures toward the structure, describing something with quiet emphasis. The others listen, nodding occasionally, their expressions thoughtful. You pause briefly, watching how they assess the space. This is not just about building, it is about possibility. What this place might become, how it might serve the town, whether it will endure. A question often explored by historians is whether many of these towns were built with long-term settlement in mind, or if they were seen primarily as temporary hubs tied to specific industries. As you look around, the answer feels uncertain. Some structures appear solid, intended to last. Others seem provisional, ready to be replaced or abandoned. You continue walking the street, offering more examples of this forward-looking mindset. A man stands beside a stack of crates, checking their contents one by one. His movements are methodical, his attention focused. Each item is accounted for, each detail noted. A lesser discussed observation suggests that much of the economic life in these towns depended on trust as much as on formal systems with agreements often made through reputation rather than written contracts. As you watch, you can see how that might function. A glance, a nod, a brief exchange of words, enough to establish understanding. The sun continues its steady climb and the heat presses more firmly now. Shadows shrink further, offering less relief. People adjust, moving more slowly, seeking brief moments of shade where they can. You notice how this affects the pace of activity. Conversations stretch slightly. Movements become more deliberate. The urgency does not disappear, but it adapts to the conditions. A reflective idea sometimes raised by scholars is whether the promise of prosperity in such towns was as strong as it appeared, or if it was often balanced by uncertainty and risk. As you move through this space, that tension feels real. Opportunity exists, but it is never guaranteed. You pass another storefront where a sign hangs slightly askew, its lettering bold but worn. Inside, a figure arranges goods with careful attention, adjusting their placement, as if preparing for customers who may or may not arrive. Further along, a man sits at a small table outside, writing in a notebook. His posture is focused, his movements precise. Each word is placed with care, as if recording something that matters beyond the moment. You slow your steps, watching him briefly. The act of writing feels significant here, a way of fixing something in place within a setting that is constantly shifting. The street continues, revealing more of the same pattern. Planning, measuring, adjusting. The town is not only reacting to what is happening, it is preparing for what might happen next. You take a slow breath, the air warm and dry, carrying the familiar sense of dustwood and distant animals. The atmosphere feels fuller now, not just with presence, but with expectation. You realize that beneath the visible activity, there is a constant negotiation between hope and reality. People invest time, effort, and resources into a future that cannot be fully predicted. And as you continue walking, you carry that awareness with you, understanding that this place is shaped not only by what is happening now, but by what people believe might happen next. A quiet force that guides decisions, builds structures, and keeps the town moving forward. You continue along the street, and without any clear signal, the tone begins to change once more. The brightness of the day softens not because the sun has fully set, but because the angle of light shifts, stretching shadows longer across the ground. The heat loosens its hold, easing just enough for the air to feel lighter against your skin. The town exhales. Movement slows not dramatically but noticeably. Steps lose some of their urgency. Voices lower as if instinctively adjusting to the changing light. The energy that carried the day forward begins to settle into something quieter, more contained. You walk on your pace, matching the subtle shift. The street feels familiar now, each turn less surprising, each detail easier to recognize. Yet in this new light, everything appears slightly altered. The same building, the same paths, but soften their edges less defined. A commonly observed pattern in cattle towns is that evenings often brought a return to more social forms of gathering, as the demands of work eased and people sought moments of rest or connection. As you move through the street, you can feel that transition beginning. A door opens ahead, releasing a brief burst of sound that quickly fades as it closes again. Laughter softer now than it was earlier, as if shaped by the time of day. A figure steps out, pausing for a moment before continuing their movements unhurried. You pass a pair of individuals walking side by side, their conversation steady, their voices low. You catch only fragments, but the tone suggests reflection rather than planning. The day's work behind them, their thoughts turning elsewhere. A small detail noted in some accounts is that the quality of light in the evening was often described as one of the few moments when the harshness of the environment seemed to ease, even if only briefly. As you look around, you understand that description. The dust still lingers, the ground remains uneven, yet the atmosphere feels gentler. You continue walking, the sounds of the town becoming more distinct in their softness. A chair scraping lightly against wood. The quiet closing of a door. The faint murmur of voices carried just far enough to be heard without being understood. A question sometimes explored in historical reflection is whether these quieter hours provided a sense of relief or simply marked a pause before the next cycle began. As you move through the space, it feels like both. There is a release, a letting go of the day's demands, yet beneath it the structure remains ready to rise again. You pass a figure seated outside, their posture relaxed, their gaze directed toward the street without focus. They do not acknowledge you, nor do you expect them to. The moment exists without interaction, shared only through presence. Further along, a smaller group gathers near a doorway, their conversation calm, their gestures minimal. They stand close enough to suggest familiarity, yet not so close as to exclude others. The balance feels natural, unforced. A lesser discussed observation suggests that evenings in such towns often revealed a different side of social interaction, one less driven by necessity and more by choice. As you watch, you can see that shift. People linger slightly longer, speak a little more freely, allow moments to extend. The light continues to fade gradually without urgency. Lamps begin to flicker to life once more, their glow, small but steady. Each one creates a pocket of illumination separating the street into segments of light and shadow. You move through these spaces, stepping from one into the next. The transitions feel gentle, almost rhythmic. Light, shadow light again. The air cools further, carrying the familiar scents in a softer form. Dust settles more quickly now, no longer stirred by the heat of the day. The town feels as though it is drawing inward, not closing but gathering itself. A reflective idea often raised by scholars is whether the emotional tone of these towns shifted significantly between day and night, or if such distinctions were more subtle than later portrayals suggest. As you walk, the change feels real yet not extreme. It is a quiet adjustment, a shift in emphasis rather than a transformation. You slow your pace once more, allowing yourself to move with the rhythm of the evening. There is no destination ahead, no task waiting, only the continuation of the path you have been following. You pass another doorway where light spills out onto the ground, creating a narrow line that stretches across your path. You step over it, the movement small, yet it marks the passage from one space into another. The street continues familiar, yet altered by the fading light. The figures around you move with a calm that feels earned, shaped by the work of the day and the promise of rest, however brief. And as you walk on, surrounded by the softened sounds and shifting light of the evening, you feel the town settling into a quieter state, not ending, but preparing to begin again in its own steady, unbroken cycle. You continue along the dimming street, and the town settles into a quieter rhythm that feels familiar, now almost expected. The lamps hold their small circles of light, and between them the darkness rests gently rather than pressing in. Your steps slow without effort, matching the pace that has gradually taken hold of everything around you. The buildings stand as they did before, their shapes softened by evening, their details less demanding. What once drew your attention now simply exists, part of a pattern you no longer need to study closely. You have seen enough to understand how it all fits together. A well-supported historical understanding suggests that cattle towns often cycled through these patterns day after day, shaped by work weather and the steady movement of people passing through. As you walk, that repetition feels natural, not monotonous, but grounding. Each day follows a similar path, yet no two are exactly the same. You pass a familiar stretch of street, recognizing the placement of a doorway, the angle of a sign, the way a lamp flickers slightly before settling. These small details anchor you, giving the sense that you have moved through this space more than once, even if it has only been a single day. A figure stands near the edge of the street, their posture relaxed, their attention drifting. You pass without interruption, your presence acknowledged only in the slightest shift of awareness. There is no need for more. A small but evocative detail noted in some recollections is that travellers often carried the memory of such towns not as a series of events, but as a collection of impressions. Light, sound, movement, all blending into something that lingered long after they had left. As you continue walking, you begin to feel that process taking place. The air cools further, the warmth of the day now only a memory held in the ground and the walls of the buildings. Your breath feels easier, your body more at rest. The sounds of the town have softened to a steady background, no longer distinct but present enough to remind you that life continues around you. You slow your pace even more, letting each step settle fully before taking the next. There is no reason to hurry. The path ahead does not demand it. A question sometimes explored in historical reflection is whether people who lived in such towns experienced them as temporary stops or as places of belonging. As you move through this final stretch, the answer feels less important than the experience itself. The town holds both possibilities, offering space for those who stay and those who pass through. You reach a point where the buildings begin to thin once again, the edge of the town returning much like where you first arrived. The open land lies beyond, quiet and expansive under the fading light. You pause, turning slightly to look back. The lamps glow softly, marking the outline of the street. The movement within them continues, though now distant, reduced to suggestion rather than detail. A reflective observation often raised by scholars is that places like this were defined as much by departure as by arrival, with people constantly moving in and out, shaping the town through their presence and absence. As you stand here, that idea feels complete. You have entered, observed, and now you prepare to leave. You take a slow breath, the air cool and steady, carrying the faint traces of everything you have experienced. Dustwood, distant smoke, the subtle scent of food long since prepared. All of it remains, even as it begins to fade. You turn back towards the open land, your steps leading you away from the street. The ground beneath your boots changes once more, less worn, less defined. Each step leaves a mark that may not last long depending on what comes next. The town remains behind you, its presence steady but no longer immediate. These sounds soften further, blending into the quiet of the surrounding space. And as you walk, the details of the day begin to settle, not disappearing but arranging themselves into something calmer, something easier to carry. The path ahead stretches gently, without urgency, without demand. The sky above deepens, the last light fading into a soft, even darkness. You continue forward, your pace slow, your breathing steady, your thoughts quiet. The town becomes a memory, not distant, but softened its edges, less defined, its rhythm still present in the way you move. And now as the space around you grows quieter, you allow that rhythm to guide you into stillness. You find a place to rest, not marked, not prepared, but sufficient. The ground holds you gently, the air cool against your skin. You lie back, your body easing into the support beneath you, your muscles releasing the last of their tension. The sounds have nearly faded now. Only the faintest trace remains, enough to remind you of where you have been, but not enough to draw you back. Your breath slows. In and out, steady even. The weight of the day lifts not all at once, but gradually, like dust settling after movement has ceased. You do not need to think about what comes next. There is no next, not for now. Only this moment, only the quiet. The town rests behind you, continuing in its own time, its own rhythm. And you rest here, separate, yet connected, part of the same cycle without needing to follow it any further. Let your eyes close, let the last details fade. The light is gone now, replaced by a soft darkness that holds everything gently. Your breathing slows further, each breath deeper than the last. The ground supports you, the air surrounds you. Nothing asks anything more. And as you drift, the memory of the town becomes softer, still blending into the quiet space where thought gives way to rest. You are here, you are safe, you are still. And slowly, without effort, you let go of the day. Now the pace softens even further. The air around you feels almost weightless, cool and calm, carrying none of the earlier demands. The sounds are gone now, or nearly gone, leaving only a faint sense of space open and undisturbed. You notice your breathing steady and slow, each inhale gentle, each exhale easing you deeper into rest. There is nothing to hold on to, nothing to consider, only the quiet rhythm that continues without effort. The ground beneath you feels stale, supportive, as if it has always been there, waiting without expectation. You do not need to adjust, do not need to move. Stillness comes naturally now. The memory of the town fades further, its detail softening into something distant, like a story told long ago. The streets, the voices, the movement all settle into the background, no longer sharp, no longer immediate. Your body feels lighter, your thoughts slower, each one drifting away before it fully forms. The space around you holds that quiet, allowing everything to rest without interruption. You take another slow breath. And then another. There is no need to count them, no need to follow them. They continue on their own, steady and calm. The night deepens, not dark in a heavy way, but soft like a gentle covering that settles over everything. It does not press down, it simply surrounds. You're no longer moving, no longer observing, only resting. And as that rest deepens, the last traces of the day fade completely, leaving only a quiet, peaceful stillness. Sweet dreams.